All right. Looking at this crowd, I think I'm going to strike out. How many of you in here, Candy's probably seen this movie. How many have seen the movie Mean Girls? I knew Candy would. Anyone else? You've seen parts of it?
I've seen parts of it.
Okay. The premise of Mean Girls is Lindsay Lohan, she's the redhead in the front. She had been homeschooled by her parents who were missionaries in Australia. And they finally moved back to the States, and she's thrust into high school, where she's never been in an American school like that. And if those of, I think most of us in this room except Kiki have been to American high school, and it is sometimes dog eat dog. It can be tough, for girls especially, it can be really tough. So she comes in, and she doesn't know what to do, and the nerds immediately latch onto her, and they befriend her, and she's accepted by the nerds. Well, the nerds are filling her in on how high school works. And they're talking about all the different cliques in the school and how the politics of all of that works. And at the school, there's this group of the popular girls, and the nerds call them the plastics, like Barbie. Because they always wear pink. That's actually one of their rules. They have to wear pink except for one day a week, when they're allowed to wear sweatpants one day a week. They have all these rules about how they behave. And they're the catty, mean girls, subsequently the name of the movie, who are constantly like running the school and being mean and picking on people. And they are every evil stereotype of mean high school popular girls. They are that. Well, strangely enough, they decide to befriend, Katie is her character's name. They decide to befriend Katie. And the nerds are like, oh man, this is great. You can be our mole. You're going to get in there and you're going to see what clicks. And you're going to be the person, like you're our inside man into this group. So she's friends with both groups. Well, as the show progresses pretty quickly, she gets a crush on this guy. I forget his name in the movie. But he is the ex-boyfriend of the leader of the Plastics. The leader of the Plastics, her name is Regina. She's the blonde. Of course, he's her ex-boyfriend, and so once he starts paying attention to Katie, like every teenage girl, even my parents' dogs do this, like, wait, I didn't want that toy, but now that you have it, I want it back. She decides that Katie can't have the boy, and so she picks back up with him and starts dating him again, and then Katie is like, what? And so she's decided that the Plastics have got to go down. And so she embarks on this plot with the nerdy girls to take each of the Plastics down in their own way. And she's devising a way to go after them. Well, of course, she gets caught by the Plastics. They get really mad. But in the course of their friendship, they made a burn book. The Plastics had made what they called a burn book. And a burn book is like a scrapbook where they had stored all these gossips and lies, these half-truths that they heard about people that they were keeping. It was like this mean book of every evil thing that they made up about people, or they kind of heard a rumor about, but they like pushed it. And so they had this book, and they had a profile on every person in the school and the way they would tease them and give them a hard time. Well, once Regina realizes that Katie has done this terrible, Katie makes her get really fat, which of course makes her really mad. And so once she realizes that Katie has burned her, she takes the burn book, she makes a page about herself, Regina does, the bad girl, and she puts it up, she copies it and puts it all over school so everybody's secrets, half-truths, all these gossip that they have about everybody is for everybody to see. Well, she makes it look like Katie's the one who did it, and everyone gets mad at Katie. Katie gets in big trouble. It's a huge mess, and like all movies, it has a very satisfying ending. It's a bit far-fetched, it's a bit unrealistic, but it is a fun movie to watch. I recommend it. But you know, that burn book was all about gossip. And as a high school teacher and a high school coach, I can tell you kids, not just kids, adults, people love to gossip. Neighbors, we live in I don't know if it's worse in a small town or if we just are around each other more, but man, in a small town especially, people love to gossip. And that burn book in the movie was all gossip. And so I was like, Well, what exactly is gossip? Sometimes like I have to talk to my girls about this. Like, what's the difference between sharing gossip and just sharing news? Because one definition of gossip is news about someone who isn't present. Well, just news about someone who isn't present isn't by itself bad. If someone becomes pregnant and I say, oh, did you hear Susie is pregnant? That's not bad news. That's sharing good news. Okay, so sometimes, like we talked about Roberta falling and Carol falling, that's news about someone who isn't present. So is that gossip? I don't know I would not consider that to be gossip. I went to a training and the guy gave me this, gave us this definition, which I like a little better. He says, any negative talk about someone to someone else who is not a part of the problem nor the solution. So if I'm mad at George, I hear or I come up with or I decide something evil about George, and I don't talk to George about it, I go over here to Tony and I'm like, Tony, did you hear that George did? Blah, 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 blah. And I start telling him this stuff about George. Unless Tony is George's boss, Tony has no business knowing that. He doesn't need to hear it. Because I tell my girls, like, if you hear something bad about someone else on the team, don't go ask other people of the team about it. Go to the girl who you heard it about. Because otherwise you're gossiping. So negative talk about someone who's not a part of the problem or the solution. The Oxford Dictionary calls gossip casual conversation about someone that's often unverified. Which is true. Well, sometimes it's verified, but a lot of times I'm just talking about someone. I don't really know if it's true, but it sounded good, so I'm going to tell you about it. So then I think to myself, well, what does the Bible say about gossip? Well, the first mention of the word gossip is in the Bible, and it's in Hebrew. The Bible is written in both Hebrew and Greek. I think the original, our Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, is written in Hebrew. And then by the time Jesus comes around, the Roman Empire had taken over, and they all spoke Greek. So the Hebrew Bible is written in Hebrew, and the New Testament, that's the Old Testament. The New Testament is written in Greek. So the Hebrew for gossip is one who reveals secrets, one who goes about as a talebearer or a scandal monger. And so the Hebrew Bible says, no, you are revealing someone else's secrets. You are a scandal monger. You are trying to cause a scandal when you tell someone else's secret. And so I think that's different. There's a difference between a secret. If someone is pregnant and they're not telling anybody yet, even though that's good news, if I tell someone before they have had a chance to tell them, I am gossiping. I'm trying to be scandalous. Because that's their secret to tell. Right? Gossip is it is harmful. In all ways, it is harmful to people when we are saying something negative that's unverified, news. We are trying to cause a scandal. So why do we do it? Why do people share gossip? And I was listening to this, what are they called? The Great Books. It was like a podcast. And they said that the reason people gossip is because it's social currency. When I have a juicy tidbit to share with somebody, they want to listen to me. I'm selling, if you will, something they want to buy. I have something they want to hear. And they want to not talk to anyone else because they want, oh, tell me what that is. It increases my social status if I have something juicy to share with you. So one of the main reasons that people gossip is because it makes them popular. The Mean Girls, they were popular. And so they collected all the gossip because it was their social currency, and they put their social currency in that burn book. But the Bible has very clear things to say about gossip. It's kind of funny because the Bible's this to me this elevated thing, and here it is talking about gossip. But it has a lot to say about gossip. There are 3 books in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, that are called the wisdom books: Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, and I forget the other one. There's 3 of them. But Proverbs has a lot to say about gossip. I just pulled a couple of them out. So the first one is wrongdoers eagerly listen to gossip. Liars pay close attention to the slander. Wrongdoers, liars, and slander. Those are pretty harsh words associated with gossip. It also said a gossip betrays confidence. So avoid a man or a woman who talks too much. Do you want to be a person who betrays confidence? Remember, gossip is sharing someone's secret. So if I'm taking, even if it's true, but it's something bad, if I'm sharing someone else's secret, that means I'm a betrayer. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to be a betrayer. This one says, a man who lacks judgment derides his neighbor, but a man of understanding holds his tongue. A gossip betrays confidence, but a trustworthy man keeps a secret. So we got to decide, do we want to be a person who is trustworthy, who keeps secrets, or do we want to be a man who lacks judgment? That's kind of harsh too. It gets harsher later. So that's the Hebrew Bible, what the Hebrew Bible has to say about it. Even in the New Testament, we see about gossip. So we've been talking about Paul. If you remember, Paul, when he was around in Jesus' time, when Jesus first died, Paul was one of the guys who was hunting down the apostles and trying to kill them. And then Jesus met Paul on the road to Damascus and said, stop it. I need you to believe that I am the God, that I am the Messiah, and you need to follow me. So then Paul spent the rest of his life following Jesus, and he went all around the countryside starting churches, planting churches, and then he would keep track of them. After he would leave them, he would write them letters and say like, hey, I've heard this, let's talk about it. He was still coaching them even after he left. So Paul was writing to his church that he had planted in Rome, the Romans, and he says to them, furthermore, just as they did not think it worthwhile to retain the knowledge of God, so God gave them over to their deprived minds, that they would do what ought not be done. So basically, Paul is saying here, you know what? God is saying, if you want to go do that, fine. You go over there and do that. I'm going to be over here. And I'm not going to protect you. Because if you want to do that bad thing, fine. Go over there and do that. But we are separate right now. You have a choice. You can hold the burn book or you can hold the good book. Which one do you want to be your Bible? Because you can't hold both. If you want to hold your burn book, then I'm going to take my word, my protection, my love. I'm still going to love you, but I'm going to love you from over there. He's taken his hands off of you. And he's going to let you do whatever you want. Our God does not force you to do anything. He gave us free will so that we can do what we want, which means we have the free will to make a bad choice. We have a free will to go do what ought not be done. And then he says, they have become filled. Those people that have gone over there to do their own thing, they've become filled with every kind of wickedness, evil, greed, and depravity. They're full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, and malice. They are gossips, slanderers, haters, God haters, insolent, angry, and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. Now, most of us would agree that we should not murder or be filled with malice, but God puts gossip in that same list. God says gossip is just as bad as hating God. Gossip is just as bad as being insolent. Gossip is just as bad as being murderous. Gossip is just as bad as being envious. You are filled with depravity if you are a person who panders and gossip. I read that, I'm like, whew. Makes me really think my lunchroom conversations because, like most people, the topic of other people come up, right? But Paul is saying, you are in the category of God haters if you are a person who deals in gossip. You're the kind of person who is inventing ways of doing evil. Those girls in that movie made a burn book. They invented a way of doing evil. And what's really gross, when I was trying to find a picture to put in the slideshow, you can buy a burn book. It's on Amazon. And I think, Why would they do that? Like, that's terrible. Paul goes on to say they are disobedient to their parents. They have no understanding, no fidelity, no love, no mercy. And although they know God's righteous decree that those who do such things deserve death. Ooh, ouch. In our culture, it's pretty socially acceptable to gossip. We all, I don't know that you all do it. I know I sometimes do it, and I got to stop it. Like, as I'm writing this, I'm like, ooh, I was very convicted in writing this message. Because God says if you do those things, you deserve death. And even Jesus agreed with him. Some of us are like, I don't deserve death. Like, I just said something negative about somebody. But Jesus reminds us, oh wait, I got to finish this one. That they not only continue to do these things, but that also approve of those who practice it. It is socially acceptable. If somebody gossips, we don't think they're a bad person. But if someone were to murder someone, we'd be like, oh my gosh, they're a terrible person. If someone were to have an affair, we would think they're a terrible person. If someone were to start a riot, we would think they're a terrible person. But God says, if you gossip, you're still just as terrible a person. And yeah, we say it's okay. And yeah, we say it's socially acceptable to gossip. We think it's just fine to do that. But Jesus says, no. You've heard it said that you shall not murder, and anyone who murders is subject to judgment. We can all agree that if you murder someone, you should be punished. You should be judged and punished. We can all agree on that. But I tell you that if you even say, you fool, you will be in the danger of the fire of hell. Jesus is saying when you gossip, when you say something bad about someone, you are murdering them. You are murdering their character. You are murdering their chances of society. Because when in the movie they would share some of that gossip, what do you think would happen to one of those kids once that piece of gossip got out? Nobody would be their friend. Everyone's teasing them. Like, I've seen it in school. A piece of gossip gets out about somebody, and suddenly no one wants to be their friend. No one wants to be on their team. No one wants to talk to them. Friends leave them. We are murdering their character when we gossip. We are just as much as if we stuck a gun in their face. When you gossip about them, you are murdering them. And you deserve the fire of hell. I think it's funny that it's called a burn book. Because what else burns? Right? So we have a choice. Do we want to live our life by the burn book, or do we want to live our life by the good book? We can't have both. We can't hold one in one hand and the other in the other hand. God's like, that's not how this works. And so, how do we fix it? What do we do about it? How do we stay away from gossip? How do we stop the spread of the fire? If a burn book starts a fire and murders somebody and is destructive, how do we stop that fire? Well, there's a few ways to do it. And again, the Book of Wisdom gives us some advice. It says, without wood, a fire goes out. Without a gossip, a quarrel dies down. You know, I had a conflict between two of my girls Friday night. If it stays between those two girls, they handled it, hopefully it's over. I had the two of them face to face, deal with it, apologize to the injured parties, and it hopefully, as long as it stays that way, it will go out. But if the injured party were to go around and tell all the other girls, she is fanning the flames, she is putting wood on the fire. And I tell my girls, I have an object lesson with my girls. And I say a scenario, and I say, is this a fire extinguisher or is this gasoline? When you do this, are you pouring gasoline on the fire or are you fire extinguishing it? And they have to decide what action it is, because it's one or the other. When you get involved in someone else's thing, when you're gossiping. There's this phrase I read, and I'm like, oh, this fits. Some people create their own storms and then get mad when it rains. Some people I want to change this to, some people fan the flame and then get mad when they get burned. Or some people want to throw wood or gasoline on a fire and then wonder why they get burned. When you gossip, when you pander and gossip, when you partake in that, God goes like this. And now you're in the fire. And you are able to get burned because God removes his protection from you. Here's another little bit of gossip that Paul, again, to his church in Philippi says. He says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely or admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about that. So we should not be dwelling on the negative things. We should not be talking about the negative things. We should be talking about the good stuff. There are some smart people who did a research project on gossip, and they found that in a situation, if gossip comes up or some negative talk comes up, if you immediately nip it in the bud, you can extinguish the fire. If you know anything about fires, if you get it right away, it's pretty containable. You know, if you like Roxanne had some fires, and she knew she shouldn't run around calling 911. The first thing she did is she stamped them out. And then she called 911. Because she knew if she had waited until she made a call, her whole house would have gone up in flame. And that's what we need to do with gossip. The second we hear it, we got to shut it down. And there's a couple ways to do that. One, I had a friend, she became really convicted about gossip, and if someone started to talk bad about someone, she'd say, I don't think we should talk about them. They're not here to defend themselves. And it was gutsy. I thought to myself, like, dang, girl. Part of me is like, oh man, I wanted to know more about that. But also, I was like, that is a brilliant way to handle this. And that had to take an immense amount of courage to sit in the face of all of your friends and to say, we shouldn't talk about this. Because remember that social currency, she was losing her social currency by saying, hey, we shouldn't talk about them, they're not here. In the training where the guy said any negative talk about someone, he's like, I don't know if he's president of a company, but he's pretty high up in management. And he says when people come to him and they are speaking negatively about someone, he says, hold on, don't tell me. Am I part of the problem or the solution? And if they say, well, he's like, no. Have you talked to them first? Well, no. Don't you tell me about it. You go talk to them first, which is what we talked about a couple weeks ago with conflict. If you have a conflict, you should go to them first. He's like, if after you have spoken to them personally, this isn't solved, and you need my help to solve a problem, the two of you can come together, and I will help mediate it. But don't try to come behind their back. Friday night, I had a conflict with two of my girls. They came to me personally, they both did separately, and then I made them face to face. And I helped them solve their problem together. Unless you are part of the problem or the solution, you have no business listening to it or hearing it. It's not your business. You shouldn't be talking about it. You're fanning the flames of the fire when you listen to negative talk about somebody. And then finally, focus on the good. Find a way to turn that conversation around to something positive. And that can be hard, and that takes some social skill. Like I think about in the lunchroom, teacher lunchroom, there's always some gossip going on in there. And I usually just try to stay out of it. I just try to not say, even if I know something, I just try to keep my mouth shut. But what I need to be doing instead is finding a way to change the subject, or find a way to be bold like my friend and say, you know what, they're not here to defend themselves. And I need to be brave and not be afraid of their opinions of me. And I need to find ways to change the subject so that we start talking about positive things. Let's talk about a TV show we're all watching, whatever, something to change the subject. And you got to do it right away. If you let that fire start to burn for a while, you can't put it out anymore. That's what the scientists found. You got to do it right away. You got to snuff it out immediately, because once it has turned into a big fire, you, one person, do not have the power to snuff it out. And so your challenge this week, if you want to grow spiritually, in your journaling time, in your prayer time, is to ask God to show you, are you a gossip? Show you situations where you gossip. To convict you, like I have asked God, like, Lord, give me a little like ding, ding, ding. when I'm starting to do it. And I get it. And when during communion, I had to confess because I get that little ping, ping, ping. And then I still do it sometimes. Sometimes I'm good and I shut up. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, this is probably gossip. And then I keep talking about it. But I got to remember that brings death. It brings death to that other person. And it removes God's protection from me when I do that. I don't want people to gossip about me. So if I stay away from gossip, if I don't play with the burn book, God puts his protection around you. God, I feel like when you really abstain from doing that, then God protects you from it. So if you want God to protect you from gossip, and if you want to be a person who does not deserve the fires of hell and does not deserve death, if you don't want to be a person of depravity, if you want to be a wise person of integrity, a smart person, we've got to learn to hold our tongues. And we've got to learn to be bold and change the subject or say, maybe we shouldn't talk about that. They're not here to defend themselves. That's how we become people of light and hope and integrity. When we focus on the good and don't talk about and don't focus on other people's bad that we have no right to talk about. And all of God's children said, amen.